Welcome to that Bible Guy. It's something we all dread, but it is all too common. How can we deal with this unity in the church? Dealing with this unity in the church, big topic, big question today to cover. But this is something that affects everyone. Growing up, I remember that sense of fear where other Christians didn't agree with each other, where we heard about splits happening in churches, or even if you're dealing with non Christians or agnostics, those who've got questions are put off by all these divisions within supposed Christianity. So what I want to say to start with is obviously I'm not going to cover everything. Obviously there are elements of disunity even within our own churches today, which obviously the international churches of Christ and churches of Christ. But we're not going to deal with everything. But what I think we will have to do to some extent as we go on here is, well, what affects me specifically and what doesn't. Obviously, I can't really control or understand splits or disunity that's happening maybe in parts of America whilst I live in the UK, and even in some cases understand what's even happening within the UK to an extent, or other parts of Europe and so on. Just to say before we go on, sometimes disunity is actually necessary, just to start with. The Bible does actually say that there will be divisions, but sometimes there has to be, believe it or not, to even show where God's favour rests. That's in 1 Corinthians 11. In verse 19, it says, no doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. So obviously there have been splits in history. There was people who preached about the deity of Jesus not being fully God, and that were seen as a heretic. And there had to be divisions at different times because of doctrinal laxity that was taking place. So there has to be divisions on occasions, obviously. So it's not always a bad thing. However, sometimes it seems to be just so much disunity. Well, let me start by saying, what is unity? And believe me, I'm no expert on this topic, but I have looked into this to some extent, partly to help myself, but in the hope that it'll help others. But what is unity? Well, we've got to start by saying that being unified means together under one common theme, if you like, one common thread, which ultimately means that we're not always going to agree. If we are unified, it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree on every single thing. We consider some things that are not that important that we don't agree on. We might not see eye to eye on things. We might not be fully similar in our personality traits. We may not always want to spend lots of time in certain circumstances, but we can still be unified in this example around the cause of following Christ, being his disciples. That's the common thread that we have. So, as I say, just to say, it doesn't mean we'll always agree on every single little thing. We can still be unified, but not agree on every little thing. And I'm sure we all understand and agree with that. Let me know your thoughts at any point on any of this video for sure. Excuse me. But currently for myself, we have heard about, even in our own movement, as I came to be a Christian over 20 years ago, I remember hearing about splits within our former churches. And it horrified me. And I felt like, oh, that means God's favour is not on them. Very naive of me to think like that at that time. But as the years went by, I've rested secured in our own movement, our current international churches of Christ. We are unified, we are together. Alarm bells. It doesn't stay like that. It hasn't stayed like that. How do I feel about that now? Oh my goodness, what does this mean? Some people are going here, some people are going there, and they don't seem unified. What does that mean? How do I deal with that? That has been something that I've had to wrestle with, and I've no doubt that many of us listening to this have also had to wrestle with this. And I will in a moment look at 8 things that we can do to help us deal with that, depending on where we're at with that. But I remember, just to recall it for a moment, I remember even in my own movement when I came in, there were members of our congregation that felt like, no, that you must only use 1 cup for communion. Only men can give it out. You must meet in a certain day, in a certain place. You must not have instrumental music, guitars and the like. And I remember having the conversations about this at the time. And obviously what that came down to was, well, is this the disputable matter or a non-disputable matter? Personally, I felt these issues were non-disputable. Sorry, disputable. Disputable. I didn't think they were essential as others did at the time. And I felt at that time, and this may apply to some of what we deal with today, the burden lies with the person who feels that the issues they're dealing with are non-disputable. And they need to be clear in their own mind, this is a non-disputable issue. The burden lies with them, and the question mark arises for them, whoever feels the issue is non-disputable, what can I tolerate? It's non-disputable to me. Others around me think this is disputable, see it differently. What can I tolerate? For me, a good modern example for me at the moment, being more of a complementarian mindset with the woman's role, regards to the woman's role, means that I don't feel like women in the church context, authoritative church context, can have exactly the same role as men. Now, some people don't feel that way, so the burden lies with me. What do I feel is non-disputable from the scriptures? And therefore, what can I tolerate for the person who thinks differently? So that's a little bit about the disputable, non-disputable. But what I want to share for a moment, based on what we're dealing with disunity in the church. I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert, and I don't know what is to come. However, I've thought about some of this. I've looked at scriptures on this, and I've thought, here's 8 things. Get 8 fingers up there. 8 things that we can do, or attitudes that we can have to help deal with disunity that has taken place, that is taking place, that we're currently immersed in, or that may arise in the future, past, present, or future. 8 things that can help us deal with disunity. First thing, trust in God. Now, that sounds very obvious, doesn't it? Trust in God. But trust in God that this is not outside of his control, this disunity. It doesn't scare him. It's not unheard of. It's not completely anti-scriptural. If you even look through the scriptures, you may find this happening again and again and again. This is not unusual or out of the ordinary, and it doesn't mean that you've followed the wrong path. It doesn't mean that the path you followed is wrong, and we can keep trusting in God despite our circumstances, that we're still doing the right thing as we live for Jesus in the midst of that sense of this is not as unified as I hoped and I wanted it to be. So the first thing, very obvious to say just as a starter, because it probably is the most important thing, is trust in God. The second thing is, in terms of whatever the disunity issue is about, yes, help out, but as much as it depends on you. Romans 12 verse 18 talks about living at peace with all men, but it puts a qualification in there though, that you can only do this as much as it depends on you. So if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. It's not possible to live at peace with everyone. It's not possible to be unified with everyone. Only so much as it depends on you. You cannot control other people's reactions. You cannot control what they consider to be disputable, non-disputables. And you cannot control the paths that they take. You cannot control every member of your congregation. But as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Help out in whatever the issue is. Find out what the issue is about. Can you help? Can you help get in the middle? Can you communicate? Can you speak words of wisdom, whatever that, can you pray about this, as much as it depends on you. And that's just to say that sometimes it may not ultimately all depend on you, and there's not an awful lot we can do. As I said, there's not an awful lot I can do about divisions that are happening in parts of the church, maybe in America, that I have no control over, don't know the people, and I don't know the issues. We've got to be able to understand, again, that trusting in God's side of things. I can't fix all this. It doesn't mean that it's all wrong. The third thing then is we must understand, and Romans 14 talks about this, and like I said earlier, what are the disputables and non-disputables? We've got to get clear on that. What's disputable here and what's non-disputable? Paul talked in Romans 14 about eating food sacrificed to idols. To some people, this was non-disputable. To others, like Paul, this is a disputable matter. I can do it or not do it. It doesn't really matter. As long as what I do for God. Now, the person who had seen it as disputable had to respect the person who's seen it as non-disputable. But just to say, we need to be clear on whatever the disunifying issues are. Is it disputable matter? Is it non-disputable? Often I know it's more complex than this, and conversations are required to clarify what is disputable and what is non-disputable here. So that is a critical issue, as I said, I've had to deal with in the past. And I'm not speaking of every issue right now. I know there are many things possibly that can disunify us. The fourth thing I want to say is focus on what you're called to do. And this is something I've had to do myself, despite that sense of we're not all agreeing with one another here. The question for me still remains, what has God called me to do? He still called me to preach and teach his word. to love him first, to reach out to the lost world, to try and help and train and equip Christians to do things like this. I must keep on doing what God has called me to do, in spite of the fact that I don't like what I see around me sometimes. And again, it goes back to that first point, trusting in God. So continue, don't lose your way. Keep focused on the positives that God has called you to do and see what God can bring about through you, as hard as that can be, focusing on God, trusting him. Here's an important one. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 10 talks about this. And we need to think about this for a moment. Got a few more here. Don't align ourselves with a person, but align ourselves with the truth. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 10 talks about, I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another in what you say, that there may be no divisions among you, that you may be perfectly united in mind and thought. My brothers and sisters, some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you. When I mean this, one says I follow Paul, another I follow Apollos, another I follow Cephas, still another I follow Christ. Some in that time were divided, and they were saying, I follow Cephas, I follow Paul, I follow Christ. They were aligning themselves to people. I'm part of this crew, and this happened throughout the history of Christianity. I'm aligning myself with this guy, you're aligning yourself with that guy. And then what ends up happening is you're very emotionally attached to that person, and it's almost like whatever they say or do is right. This is not the way it should be. I mean, ultimately, we all follow Christ in this scenario, but I align myself with the truth, not a group, not this individual versus this individual. Now, it may so happen that that individual stands for this truth, and in that sense, I align myself with them, but I'm not following this person or this group per se. I'm following this truth. And I know that that can get a bit blurry, but again, don't align ourselves with people, align ourselves with whatever we feel is true, and that we keep pursuing the truth. The sixth one then, I'll clarify these at the end again though, it just is a call to speak the truth. Obvious as it may sound, be transparent. Ephesians 4:15 says, speak the truth in love and build one another up. One of the issues I've noticed over the years with disunity, and I'm guilty of it myself at times, is that people don't say how they really feel. And I think this is a travesty. So often people have these negative thoughts about others, and they're maybe not said. The Bible is very clear that we must not slander people, and we must be honest about them, to them, and not behind their back. We must let people know how we feel, what we think about, and again, within reason and with wisdom, of course. But so much trouble and hardship can come about because other people view and talk about someone in a certain way, and they've never had a chance to defend themselves. We must watch out for this. Speak the truth in love and be transparent. Again, with wisdom, get advice on occasions. I know that can be difficult, but speak the truth in love. This is critically important. If we feel like our brother or sister is going in the wrong direction, let's be honest and be real about that. And again, just to say, I did my master's course a few years ago on this, and I was asked about what do you feel would help in the future, given our split 2003, what do you think would be helpful to avoid this in the future? In fact, I'll get to that one in just a moment. That was number 6, speak the truth and be transparent. We'll keep that for number 8. But number 7, this is an important one as well. They're all important in terms of maintaining and dealing with disunity in the church. Build vision, not uniformity. All right, so we want to preach the truth, preach the gospel. You may be a leader, you may be a teacher, or whatever, but we want to try and preach vision, our goals, our Christian goals, not that we're to be uniform. So preach the vision, not uniformity. What I'd like to say is that we're all going to follow Christ in our own way, but it should be in line with the scriptures. So we don't tell everybody exactly how that looks for them, but it must be in line with the scriptures. Over the years, I've had many people point out to me that I was maybe on a wrong path. Often I would go off and get immersed myself in the gym culture, training and that type of lifestyle, and I would veer off slightly from just being committed to Christ. And I need someone to point it out, and I'm so glad that they did. But there were times as well, though, where people were saying, look, you should share your faith at this time every day. You should write out a diary for exactly what you need to do, or you need to do something and call somebody at this time, or why did you not do that thing that, I advised you to do? That's not what we're to do. We have freedom in following Christ. We've got to do it our own way, but it should be in line with the scriptures. And if we see each other doing it in a way that's not in line with the scriptures, I preached recently there about, must Christians go to church? Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. If someone's not attending meetings of the body, well, you can't just sit back and go, I'm doing it my own way. I just meet in my own home. Okay, well, let's talk about that. We can't do it our own way, but as we all see it in line with the scriptures, we've got to watch out for each other. Last one, I referred to it a moment ago. I think this is so important. We must remain open to input in terms of this unity. People must remain open to input. What I did say and I'd warn us about for a moment is watch out for the prickly. This is what I was talking about with my masters. What did I think would help us not, and again, this is not the golden bullet or anything, but what would help us not split in the future? What would help us to deal with the problems we've had in the past? Well, everybody should be open to input, even if the person giving it is wrong. We've got to watch out when people are prickly from input. Now, there may be underlying issues there or something that wasn't said right before, and there may be stuff that needs discussed. But I'm very concerned when people are prickly, when people bring things up with them. Again, get to what's behind it. But if you're consistently prickly when anyone points anything out to you on any level, I'm very concerned. In order for us to avoid disunity, avoid falling out, be able to move on in harmony with one another, we've got to be able to hear input from our brothers and sisters as they watch out for us and vice versa. Someone's overly critical, deal with that in the conversation. But I think that's critically important. I went a bit longer today, but I feel like this is such an important topic, dealing with disunity in the church. As I say, just to clarify the 8 things that I've said that really will help us in order to deal with disunity, whatever way or form, past, present, or future, trusting in God. Sounds obvious, but really super important, and everything else hangs on that one. Help as much as it depends on you. Again, Romans 12, verse 18. Figure out what are the disputable and non-disputable issues. Focus on what you're called to do in spite of whatever circumstances you're currently in. Don't lose your way or your calling. Don't align with the person, but align with truth. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 10. Speak the truth and be transparent. Be real. Be honest. Build vision, not uniformity. We're not all creating carbon copies of each other, but we're all following Christ. Let's help each other as we do that. And the last one, remain open to input. Watch out for people being overly prickly and try to help them in that. We can all be guilty of that. Hope some of this has helped us today. I'm sure you've got thoughts on this. Please let me know what they are. If you like this, please hit the like button. Please share it on for other people. There are many people just struggling with this right now. Please subscribe to that Bible Guy, and let's get his word out there.